The stars burned cold and distant through the viewport of the orbital station, their ancient light falling on the face of a boy who had seen too much death for his 17 years. Marcus Cole pressed his palm against the reinforced glass, watching the debris field that had once been Earth's last defense fleet drift silently through the void. Somewhere in that twisted metal graveyard, his parents' ship still tumbled, a frozen tomb among thousands. The hegemony had come without warning 3 months ago. Their massive dreadnoughts had darkened the skies of 100 human colonies, their weapons had turned cities to ash, and their ultimatum had been simple: surrender or die. Most of humanity had chosen to fight. Most of humanity had died. Marcus turned away from the viewport as the station's ancient systems groaned around him. The refuge, they called it now, though it had once been a simple mining platform in the asteroid belt. 3,000 humans survived here, hidden from hegemony patrols by the dense mineral deposits that scrambled their sensors. 3,000 souls clinging to life in a universe that no longer wanted them. He walked through narrow corridors lit by flickering emergency lights, passing families huddled in converted cargo bays and soldiers who had forgotten how to smile. Everyone knew his face now. Everyone knew his story. The orphaned son of Admiral Cole and Chief Engineer Maya Cole, the boy genius who had graduated from the academy at 15, the tactical prodigy who had predicted the hegemony attack 3 days before it happened. Nobody had listened then. They would listen now. The command center had been carved from a mining control room, its original purpose still visible in the ore processing readouts that blinked uselessly alongside tactical displays. Captain Elena Vasquez stood at the central holodable, her gray hair pulled back tight, her face carved from years of hard service. Around her stood what remained of humanity's military leadership, a handful of officers who had escaped the slaughter through luck or skill or both. Marcus entered without announcement, and conversations died one by one as people noticed him. He was used to this, the way adults looked at him, half reverent and half uncomfortable. A child should not understand war the way he did. A child should not have ideas that made grown commanders shift in their seats. Captain Vasquez nodded to him. She had been the first to take him seriously, back when he was just a weird kid with too many theories and not enough respect for military tradition. She had listened when he explained how the hegemony's formation patterns revealed their command structure. She had believed when he predicted their invasion route. Now, she was one of the few who still trusted his judgment, even when it sounded like madness. The holodable displayed a 3-dimensional map of local space, hegemony patrol routes marked in threatening red, human settlements marked in the pale blue of the recently deceased. One by one, those blue markers had winked out over the past weeks as the alien forces systematically hunted down every trace of human civilization. Marcus studied the display for a long moment before speaking. His voice had not yet fully deepened, still carrying traces of the boy he had been before the war, but something in its tone made people listen. "The hegemony thinks we are finished," he said. "They have destroyed our fleets, burned our colonies, scattered our people across the void. By their calculations, humanity is no longer a threat. They are wrong." Commander Park, a scarred veteran who had lost his entire squadron in the first wave, crossed his arms. "With respect, the boy is living in fantasy. We have 7 functional ships, none larger than a frigate. The hegemony has thousands. This is not a war we can win." Marcus did not argue. Instead, he tapped the holodable, bringing up a new display. Ship after ship appeared, scattered across dozens of star systems. Some were military vessels that had fled the final battle. Others were civilian transports, mining ships, even pleasure yachts that had been modified for combat. The count reached 50, then 100, then kept climbing. "These are the ships that escaped," Marcus explained. "Hidden in nebulae, asteroid fields, dead systems the hegemony has not bothered to search. Alone, each of these vessels is helpless. Together, they represent the largest human fleet since the fall of Earth." Admiral Chen, the highest-ranking officer to survive the war, leaned forward with interest despite her obvious exhaustion. "And how do you propose we gather this fleet without the hegemony noticing?" Marcus switched the display again, this time showing a complex web of communication routes. "The hegemony monitors all standard channels," he said, "but they do not understand human creativity. My mother developed an experimental communication system before she died, using quantum entanglement to send messages through subspace frequencies the hegemony cannot detect. I have the prototype. I can build more." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. For the first time since the invasion began, something like hope flickered in the eyes of those gathered. But there was more. Marcus had not slept in 4 days, spending every hour studying hegemony battle patterns, analyzing their command structure, searching for the weakness he knew must exist. And he had found it. He brought up a detailed schematic of a hegemony command ship, the massive vessels that coordinated their fleets with mechanical precision. "Every hegemony force operates under direct control from one of these command nodes," he explained. "Destroy the node, and the subordinate ships lose coordination. They do not think independently. They cannot adapt without orders from above." Commander Park's skepticism wavered. "You are suggesting we target their command structure." "I am suggesting we become what they cannot predict," Marcus replied. "The hegemony has conquered 100 species across 1,000 years. They have reduced warfare to mathematics, probability, and overwhelming force. They do not understand chaos. They do not understand sacrifice. They do not understand humans." Captain Vasquez stepped forward, her eyes meeting Marcus's with something like fierce pride. "What exactly are you proposing?" Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment everything changed. This was the moment he stopped being a refugee and became something else entirely. "I am proposing that we stop hiding," he said. "I am proposing that we gather every ship, every soldier, every human willing to fight. I am proposing that we strike at the heart of the hegemony occupation force and show the galaxy that humanity is not extinct. We are just getting started." The holodeable hummed softly as Marcus began laying out his strategy, a complex ballet of misdirection, sacrifice, and calculated risk that would either save his species or doom them forever. Either way, the boy who had lost everything was about to change everything. And somewhere in the depths of space, the hegemony's perfect calculations were about to encounter their first significant error. The next 3 weeks transformed the refuge from a hiding place into the nerve center of human resistance. Marcus worked with an intensity that frightened even the most hardened soldiers, sleeping only when his body physically collapsed, waking with new ideas already forming in his mind. His mother's communication devices proved more challenging to replicate than expected, but he adapted the designs, simplified them, found workarounds that the original engineers had never considered. Messages began flowing through subspace, tiny whispers that slipped past hegemony sensors like ghosts. Hidden ships received coordinates, instructions, hope. One by one, they began moving toward the designated rendezvous point, a dead system 3 jumps from the refuge, where a dying red sun cast crimson light on barren worlds. The fleet that gathered there was unlike anything military doctrine had ever imagined. Sleek fighters nestled alongside bulky cargo haulers. Luxury yachts with hastily welded weapons platforms shared space with battered warships held together by prayer and determination. 17 nationalities, dozens of languages, thousands of desperate people united by nothing but their refusal to die quietly. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Defiant, a patrol frigate that had somehow survived the fall of Mars. Captain Vasquez had insisted that the command center be established here, on a military vessel with proper tactical systems. But everyone understood who was really in command. The 17-year-old Orphaned had become the most important human alive, the one mind capable of turning this ragged collection of survivors into a fighting force. He watched the ships arrive on the main view screen, counting each one, memorizing their capabilities, already calculating how they would fit into his strategy. The plan had evolved from his initial concept, growing more complex and more dangerous with each new variable. It required timing measured in seconds, coordination across light years, and a level of precision that no human fleet had ever achieved. It also required something the hegemony would never expect. It required humans to act like humans. Admiral Chen entered the bridge, her footsteps heavy with exhaustion and doubt. She had supported Marcus's strategy in the command meetings, had argued for giving him authority, but he could see the fear behind her eyes. She was trusting the fate of humanity to a teenager, and every instinct in her body screamed that this was madness. "The final count is in," she reported. 147 vessels, approximately 30,000 personnel, though many are civilians with minimal training. Marcus nodded without looking away from the viewscreen. "It will be enough." "The hegemony fleet in this sector numbers over 2,000 ships," Chen continued. "Their command structure includes 3 major nodes and 17 minor coordination points. Even with your strategy, the mathematical odds of victory are essentially zero." Now Marcus did turn, and something in his eyes made the admiral step back. "The hegemony calculates odds based on ship numbers, firepower ratios, and tactical positioning," he said. "They do not factor in desperation. They do not factor in fury. They do not factor in what happens when humans have nothing left to lose." He stepped toward the holodable at the center of the bridge, activating a display of the hegemony's local deployment. 3 months of observation had revealed patterns they did not know they had, assumptions they did not know they were making. The perfect military machine had perfect weaknesses if you knew where to look. "Their primary command node is here," he said, highlighting a massive station orbiting a gas giant 2 systems away. "Supreme Commander Vorix oversees all operations in human space from this location. He has never lost a battle in 300 years of service. He has never faced an opponent who thinks the way we think." "And how do we think?" Chen asked. Marcus allowed himself a small smile, the first since his parents died. "Like we have already won." The briefing that followed was unlike any military planning session in human history. Marcus spoke for 3 hours, laying out every phase of the operation, every contingency, every calculated risk. Ship captains listened through communication links, their faces displaying mixtures of terror and determination. Ground forces commanders took notes on tactics they had never imagined. Even the civilians volunteered for roles that would almost certainly kill them. The plan was insane. The plan was brilliant. The plan was so thoroughly human that the hegemony's predictive algorithms would never see it coming. On the 3rd day after the fleet assembled, Marcus gave the order to move. 147 ships jumped into hyperspace, scattering across 3 different vectors toward 3 different objectives. The largest group, led by the Defiant, headed directly toward the primary command node. The second group targeted a hegemony supply depot that fed half their occupation forces. The third group, the smallest and most vulnerable, headed towards something that no one outside Marcus's inner circle knew existed. As the stars stretched into lines around the Defiant, Marcus stood alone at the viewport, watching reality itself bend around them. His parents had died believing humanity was finished. He would prove them wrong or die trying. The first shots of humanity's counterattack would be fired within the hour. The hegemony supply depot hung in space like a bloated metal flower, its petals spreading wide to receive the cargo ships that kept the occupation forces fed and armed. Commander Yuki Tanaka studied it through the viewscreen of her converted passenger liner, counting the defense platforms, measuring the patrol routes, knowing that her 20 ships were about to attempt something that every tactical manual said was impossible. Her communication screen flickered with Marcus's face, transmitted across light years through the impossible quantum network he had built. "The timing must be perfect," he said. 30 seconds early or late, and the entire operation fails. Tanaka nodded. She had been a merchant captain before the war, running luxury cruises between Earth and the outer colonies. Now she commanded a fleet of civilians who had learned to fight because the alternative was extinction. Understood. We are ready. The countdown reached 0. 20 ships dropped out of hyperspace inside the depot's defense perimeter, so close that the hegemony sensors barely had time to register their presence before the first missiles launched. Fire blossomed across the depot's surface as cargo containers and fuel storage tanks detonated in chains of destruction. The hegemony response was immediate and overwhelming. Defense platforms rotated toward the attackers, unleashing streams of energy that turned 2 ships to plasma in the first exchange. But Tanaka's people were not fighting to win. They were fighting to distract. While the depot's defenders focused on the apparent attack, 3 small vessels slipped away from the battle, their stealth systems hiding them in the chaos of combat. They carried no weapons. They carried something far more valuable. Across the galaxy, the third group executed its mission with equal precision. 12 ships approached a dead moon orbiting a forgotten planet, their sensors searching for something that official hegemony records insisted did not exist. Marcus had found references to it in captured data fragments, hints of a secret that the alien empire had buried deep. The prison was carved into the moon's core, a labyrinth of cells and torture chambers where the hegemony kept their most troublesome captives. Not soldiers, not criminals, scientists, philosophers, leaders of conquered species who had refused to surrender their minds along with their worlds. Among them were humans, 17 of them, captured in the war's first days, kept alive for interrogation and study. The hegemony wanted to understand how humans thought, what made them resist when logic said they should submit. They had spent 3 months trying to break these prisoners. They had failed. The rescue team hit the prison with surgical precision, using access codes extracted from hegemony communications and entry points Marcus had identified through careful analysis. The guards never saw them coming. The automated defenses never had a chance to activate. Within 20 minutes, 17 broken but unbeaten humans were being carried to waiting ships, their knowledge of hegemony methods and weaknesses worth more than 100 warships. But the main action was still unfolding around Supreme Commander Vorix's command station. Marcus watched the battle develop on the Defiant's tactical display, seeing patterns that no one else could see, calculating probabilities that no computer could match. The hegemony defenders fought with their usual mechanical efficiency, their formations perfect, their tactics flawless. And that was exactly what Marcus had expected. The human fleet engaged in what appeared to be a desperate frontal assault, throwing themselves against the station's defenses in wave after wave of suicidal attacks. Ships died. Humans died. The hegemony predictive systems calculated that the attackers would be destroyed within 2 hours, their foolish offensive crushed by superior firepower and coordination. They did not notice the 3 small vessels that had slipped away from the supply depot battle. They did not notice the signals those vessels were broadcasting, signals that mimicked hegemony command frequencies with perfect accuracy. They did not notice that their own defensive calculations were being fed false data, making them see threats where none existed and ignore dangers that were very real. By the time Vorix understood what was happening, it was too late. The Defiant punched through the station's final defense line with a maneuver that should have been impossible, threading through a gap in the coverage that existed only because the hegemony's own systems had been fooled into creating it. Marcus stood on the bridge as the ancient frigate shuddered under enemy fire, his eyes fixed on the command station, growing larger in the viewscreen. All power to forward weapons, he ordered. Target the primary communication array. Captain Vasquez relayed the command without hesitation. The Defiant's guns spoke, and for one brilliant moment, the station's heart was exposed. Not the reactor, not the command center. The array that connected Vorix to every ship in his fleet, the neural network that allowed the hegemony to function as a single perfect organism. The explosion rippled outward, and 2,000 hegemony ships suddenly went silent. Coordination vanished. Formation discipline collapsed. Individual captains, trained to follow orders rather than think independently, found themselves facing chaos they had no idea how to handle. And into that chaos, humanity struck with everything it had. The battle that followed would be remembered for centuries, though the details were often debated and frequently exaggerated. What was certain was that 147 human vessels, most of them civilians with improvised weapons, managed to destroy or disable over 300 hegemony warships in a single engagement. Supreme Commander Vorix's command station was reduced to slag, its once invincible leader killed by a species he had dismissed as primitives. Marcus watched the victory unfold with hollow eyes. 37 human ships had been destroyed. Over 8,000 people had died. The cost of survival was written in blood and fire across the void. But humanity had proven something that the galaxy had forgotten. They had proven that mathematics and probability were not the only forces that shaped the universe. Sometimes, a single mind with nothing left to lose could defy the odds that said victory was impossible. As the surviving fleet gathered to tend its wounds and count its dead, Marcus began planning the next phase of the war. The hegemony would not forgive this defeat. They would send more ships, more commanders, more overwhelming force. And humanity would be ready to defy them again. Word of the victory spread through subspace like wildfire, carried by the quantum networks that Marcus had built and the desperate hope that survivors everywhere had clung to through the dark months of occupation. On 100 hidden outposts, in 1,000 secret refuges, humans heard that the hegemony could be beaten. Humans heard that there was still a chance. And then something unexpected happened. Other species began to listen too. The hegemony had ruled this region of the galaxy for over 1,000 years, conquering world after world, absorbing civilization after civilization into their perfect machine. Most species had accepted their fate, their spirit crushed, their resistance reduced to distant memory. But not all of them, not quite. The first contact came 3 days after the battle, a transmission on frequencies that Marcus had never seen before. The face that appeared on the Defiance communication screen was not human, its features angular and crystalline, its eyes glowing with inner light. The being called itself an ambassador of the crystalline collective, a species that had submitted to hegemony rule 600 years ago. "We have watched your kind since you first reached the stars," the ambassador said. "We believed you would fall as we fell, as all species fall before the hegemony. We were wrong." Marcus studied the alien carefully, searching for deception, manipulation, the countless traps that the universe had taught him to expect. "What do you want?" "The same thing you want," the ambassador replied, "freedom." Over the following weeks, more contacts emerged from the shadows. The void swimmers, beings of pure energy who had hidden in gas giant atmospheres since their conquest. The stone singers, whose mountain cities had been reduced to rubble but whose spirit remained unbroken. The dream weavers, the memory keepers, the star dancers, each species with its own story of loss and survival, each species with something to offer the growing resistance. Marcus found himself coordinating not just human forces but an alliance of the oppressed, beings whose differences were vast but whose hatred of the hegemony bound them together. His mind stretched to accommodate new variables, new capabilities, new possibilities. The strategy evolved from a desperate human gamble into something larger, something that had the potential to reshape the entire galactic order. But the hegemony was not idle. Supreme Commander Vorix had been an arrogant fool, the High Council decided. He had underestimated the humans, allowed them to catch him unprepared. His successor would not make the same mistake. Grand Admiral Thex was the most decorated commander in hegemony history, veteran of 100 campaigns, architect of the conquest of entire star sectors. She was cold, methodical, utterly without mercy. And she was coming with a fleet that made the previous occupation force look like a token gesture. Marcus received intelligence of the approaching armada from his new allies, their networks of informants providing data that human sensors could never have gathered. 5,000 warships, including the Hegemony flagship itself, weapons that could crack planets, commanders who had studied every detail of the first defeat and developed counter-strategies for every tactic that had been used. The War Council that gathered on the Defiant's expanded bridge included beings from a dozen species, their forms so varied that some could barely perceive each other through normal senses. Admiral Chen represented human military tradition, her skepticism having evolved into cautious faith. Captain Vasquez stood at Marcus's right hand, her loyalty absolute. And around them, beings of crystal and energy and living stone debated the future in languages that translation systems struggled to parse. "They outnumber us 10 to 1, Chen said flatly. "Even with our allies, even with everything we have built, the mathematics of this battle are impossible." Marcus stood at the holotable, studying the approaching enemy fleet with eyes that saw patterns within patterns. For 3 months, he had been learning to think in ways that transcended human limitations, absorbing knowledge from species that perceived reality through senses humans did not possess. His mind had become something new, something that even he did not fully understand. "The Hegemony believes in mathematics," he said quietly. "They believe that sufficient force, properly applied, can overcome any obstacle. They are correct. If we fight this battle on their terms, we will lose." Then how do we fight it? The question came from the crystalline ambassador, its form flickering with colors that expressed emotions humans could not name. Marcus looked up from the display, and everyone in the room felt the weight of his gaze. "The Hegemony has built their empire on the principle of control," he said. "Every species they conquer, every world they claim, every resource they acquire increases their power. But control is not strength. Control is a cage that traps the controller as much as the controlled." He began laying out his strategy, and even those who had come to trust his judgment felt their certainty waver. This was not a battle plan. This was a transformation. The Hegemony expected resistance. They expected clever tactics and desperate gambits. They did not expect surrender. When Grand Admiral Thex's fleet arrived at the designated coordinates, they found the Alliance forces waiting for them, arranged in perfect submission postures that universal protocols recognized as capitulation. White flags flew from human vessels. Energy signatures were reduced to minimum levels. Weapons were powered down. The Grand Admiral was suspicious, but her predictive systems assured her that this was consistent with rational behavior. The Alliance had recognized the futility of resistance. The humans, for all their earlier victories, had accepted that they could not overcome superior force. Logic had prevailed. She ordered the surrender accepted. The Alliance ships were directed to approach the Hegemony fleet in small groups, to be boarded and processed, and their crews taken for re-education. Standard procedures were followed with mechanical precision. Guards were deployed. Systems were accessed. Everything proceeded exactly as the protocols dictated. And that was when everything changed. The ships that the Hegemony boarded were not crewed by defeated soldiers. They were crewed by beings who had spent months learning every detail of Hegemony technology, every weakness in their systems, every assumption in their programming. They were crewed by species whose unique abilities had been hidden from Hegemony knowledge for centuries. They were crewed by humans who had accepted death as the price of victory. The crystalline beings disrupted Hegemony sensors with harmonics that their technology could not filter. The void swimmers flowed through ship systems like ghosts, rewriting code that had been considered unbreakable. The stone singers vibrated at frequencies that shattered critical components. And the humans, the crazy, impossible, never-say-die humans, fought with a fury that the Hegemony had never encountered in 1,000 years of conquest. From the bridge of the Defiant, hidden in the chaos of the false surrender, Marcus coordinated the transformation of defeat into victory. His voice carried across quantum networks, directing forces that span light years. His mind held variables that should have been impossible to track. His strategy unfolded like a flower made of fire and defiance. Grand Admiral Thex watched her perfect fleet dissolve into chaos. Ships that had been boarded were now fighting from within, their systems compromised, their crews overwhelmed. Ships that had not been boarded were firing on each other as their coordination networks collapsed under attacks they did not understand. Her flagship itself was under assault, not from external forces, but from systems that had been corrupted by infiltrators she had never detected. How, she demanded as her bridge exploded around her. How is this possible? The answer came from a 17-year-old human whose face appeared on her failing viewscreen. A boy whose eyes held the weight of worlds lost and the fire of worlds yet to be won. Because you never understood what you were fighting, Marcus said. You saw numbers and resources and military assets. You never saw hearts and minds and spirits that would rather burn than submit. You conquered bodies, but you never conquered souls. And that is why you will fall. The Hegemony flagship died in a cascade of failures that its designers had sworn were impossible. Grand Admiral Thex, the most decorated commander in their history, became another casualty of the species they had dismissed as primitives. And across the sector, the news spread that the Hegemony could not merely be defeated. The Hegemony could be destroyed. The final campaign lasted 3 years, though calling it a campaign did not truly capture what it became. It was a transformation, a rewriting of galactic history, a demonstration that the old order could be replaced by something new. Marcus Cole grew into adulthood during those years, though in many ways he had left childhood behind on the day his parents died. He remained at the center of the Alliance, not as a commander in any traditional sense, but as something more complex. He was a strategist, a symbol, a bridge between species who had never truly communicated before. He was the mind that could see patterns across cultures and capabilities, the voice that could inspire beings who breathed methane and beings who existed as pure thought. The Hegemony fought back with everything they had. They sent fleet after fleet, each one larger and more powerful than the last. They deployed weapons that had not been used in centuries, technologies that could destroy stars and shatter moons. They called upon allies of their own, species who had benefited from their rule and feared the chaos that would follow its collapse. But they could not fight what they could not understand. Every tactic they employed was anticipated. Every strength they revealed became a weakness to be exploited. Marcus and his network of allies had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a collective intelligence that combined the best of dozens of species into a force that was greater than the sum of its parts. The turning point came at the Battle of the Core, where the Hegemony made their final stand around their capital world. Every ship they could muster was gathered there, a wall of steel and fire that should have been impenetrable. The Alliance forces that faced them were still outnumbered, still outgunned by any traditional measure. But Marcus had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. He had studied every species in the Alliance, every capability they possessed, every secret they had hidden from their conquerors. He had woven their strengths together into a tapestry of destruction that the Hegemony could not comprehend. The crystalline collective created fields that bent light and sensor readings, making the Alliance fleet appear to be everywhere and nowhere at once. The Void Swimmers penetrated Hegemony ships at the quantum level, disrupting their systems from within. The Stone Singers generated frequencies that resonated with the structural weaknesses in Hegemony armor. The Dream Weavers reached into the minds of enemy commanders and showed them visions of defeat that became self-fulfilling prophecies. And the humans did what humans had always done. They fought with creativity and courage and sheer stubborn refusal to accept that the impossible was truly impossible. They flew missions that their allies considered suicide and somehow survived. They invented solutions to problems that had stumped other species for millennia. They laughed in the face of death and danced in the flames of burning worlds. The hegemony fell. Their great fleets were destroyed or captured. Their capital world was surrounded and forced to surrender. Their leaders were brought before a tribunal of species who had suffered under their rule for generations, and justice was served in forms that varied by culture, but shared a common theme of accountability and transformation. And through it all, Marcus Cole remained at the center, guiding the Alliance through the transition from war to peace, from destruction to construction. He could have claimed power for himself. He could have built an empire to rival what the hegemony had created, but that was not what he wanted. "I lost everything when this war began," he said in his final address to the Alliance, speaking from the bridge of the Defiant as representatives of 100 species listened. "My parents, my home, my childhood, the future I thought I would have. The hegemony took all of it away, and for a long time I thought that vengeance would fill the emptiness they left behind." He paused, looking out at the faces, the forms, the beings who had followed him through the fire. But vengeance is not enough. Winning is not enough. If we simply replace one empire with another, we have learned nothing from our suffering. The Alliance did not become a new hegemony. Instead, it became something that had never existed before, a voluntary federation of equals, species who chose to work together because they had learned that cooperation was stronger than conquest. There were struggles and setbacks, disagreements and difficulties. The galaxy did not transform overnight. But it transformed. Decades later, Marcus Cole stood on the observation deck of a space station orbiting what had once been the hegemony capital world. The scars of war had faded. New cities rose where old ones had fallen. Ships of 100 different designs moved through space in patterns of trade and exploration rather than conquest. His hair was gray now, his face lined with years of leadership and responsibility. But his eyes still held the same fire that had burned in the orphaned genius who had first defied galactic tyranny from a hidden mining station. A young human approached him, a child of the new generation that had been born into peace rather than war. She looked up at him with eyes full of questions, full of the same curiosity that had driven him to look beyond the obvious and see the patterns that others missed. "Is it true?" she asked. "Did you really defeat the hegemony when you were only 17? Marcus smiled, remembering the boy he had been, the losses he had suffered, the impossible odds he had overcome. "We all defeated them," he said gently. "Every species that refused to surrender. Every being that chose to fight when fighting seemed hopeless. Every heart that believed that freedom was worth dying for." He looked out at the stars, at the galaxy that had been transformed by sacrifice and hope, and the stubborn refusal to accept that tomorrow had to be like yesterday. "I just happen to be good at strategy." The child nodded solemnly, not fully understanding, but sensing that she had touched something important. And she walked away into a future that orphaned genius had helped create, a future where humanity stood as equals among the stars, where tyranny was a memory rather than a reality, where the word impossible had lost its power to limit imagination. The stars burned bright through the viewport, their ancient light falling on a galaxy that had learned the most important lesson that humans had ever taught it. Sometimes the odds did not matter. Sometimes one mind with the courage to see possibilities and the determination to pursue them could change everything. Sometimes the universe needed someone to stand up and say no, not just for themselves but for everyone who had forgotten how to fight. And in that galaxy, among those stars, humanity had earned its place. They had earned it with blood and fire and sacrifice. They had earned it with genius and courage and stubborn refusal to die quietly. They had earned it by being exactly what they had always been, a species that looked at impossible odds and said, "Humanity, yeah, watch us."